welcome to tonight's webinar. We're going to give a few minutes and just give everybody an opportunity to join tonight. We have 1,500 registered, which we're totally delighted with. So a small tip, if you're on the call, please don't leave because you mightn't be able to get back on. So tonight's webinar is called A Polyvagal Approach to COVID-19. And one of the things that Deb is going to do at the end, she's going to leave plenty of time for questions and answers. So there's a question and answer function down the bottom of your screen. So please send in as many questions as possible. As well as people are coming on the call, there's a chat function. So maybe one of the things Deb is going to be really talking about is the need for connection during this time and how, without being able to touch each other and sometimes not being able to see each other, that we're really suffering. So please maybe just on the chat function, give us your name and where you're from. And we might call out a few as they come in. So my name is Liam, I'm the director of PCPSI, and just to say at the start, I really hope that your family and yourself are safe and well during these challenging times. For those of you that don't know Deb is a good old friend at this stage and someone that I really enjoy working with and really enjoy seeing. And Deb has wrote this book, The Polyvagal Theory in Therapy, Engage in the Rhythm of Regulation. And I think from my own perspective, I think what Deb has done is that she's created a map that bridges Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory with what it looks like in clinical practice and indeed life. And we have Deb here tonight, which we're very grateful for. But even further good news is that Deb is coming back in November. She's coming back to Cork to do a 4-day workshop from November the 26th until the 29th. The workshop is called Engaging the Rhythm of Regulation, the Foundations of Polyvagal Informed Practice, Part 1. And then she's going to come back in 2021 to do Part 2, which again, we're very excited about. So there's a lot of names coming through now, Deb. Martina from Limerick, Catherine, Helen, Katie, Bella, Kieran, Carol from Dublin, Anne-Marie from Galway. So it's great to have so many on the call. Is there anything else that I need to say now before I hand over to you, Deb? I don't think so. Just please send in the questions and answers, and we'll give about 15 minutes at the end. We have some questions already, 2 very interesting questions around sleep and around, I suppose, the idea of titration and integration. Yeah. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Deb. Welcome, Deb.
Thank you. I am going to do a screen share here just to get my, I'm not going to get that. I'm going to get it in a minute. Going to get my slides here for you. And then okay, just to give us something to land on here to keep us a bit organized, because I think everybody's feeling some need for structure, and yet we want to also remember that our nervous systems each have a different need for structure. So I just have a few slides to sort of give us the outline for what we're going to talk about this evening. And I wanted to start with this. These are the 3 autonomic nervous system needs around safety: context, choice, and connection. And these 3 elements are being challenged in this current pandemic crisis all the time. And if we take them one at a time just for a moment, context. Our nervous system needs context. It needs information, because without information and context, the nervous system has a state response, and that energy gets fed up to the brain, and the brain is going to make up a story. And the story is going to be one that makes sense of what's happening in the nervous system. So we want to make sure we have context, that we have good information, and that the nervous system is reassured by the fact that we have enough information that then the brain can make up the story that supports our connection and safety. So that's context, and then choice. And choice is essential for the nervous system. When the nervous system has a sense of choice being limited, or we feel trapped, the nervous system enacts an adaptive survival response. And in this day and age, our choice around so many things is now limited. And so just in the time we are living in now, that sense of choice is greatly reduced. And for many of us, that then brings either a sympathetic mobilized fight or flight, or that dorsal disconnect, shutdown, despair. So again, in this time, we want to get good context, and we also want to find what are the ways we can offer choice within the structure that we now have to live with, so that the nervous system does not feel trapped. And then the third, of course, is connection. And that is an essential need for the nervous system to feel safe enough to engage in the world from a regulated place. And again, connection is being challenged. The ways we connect, the old ways we connect, have been greatly reduced or restricted or taken away. And now we're having to find new ways of connecting, most of it virtually, remotely, online, or from 6 feet apart, or across the street on a balcony yelling at your neighbor. So it's a very different experience for our nervous systems. So as we go through, and as you go through, these next weeks, if you can remember context, choice, connection, and remember to try and attend to those, your nervous system will have a better experience and be able to bring more safety and regulation. So then those 3 organizing principles, just a quick review of them. Neuroception, which is the way our nervous system takes in cues from the world. And neuroception, we're going to talk about in a minute again, is getting immense cues of danger all the time now, which then leads us to hierarchy, these 3 predictable pathways of response: ventral connection, sympathetic mobilization, dorsal vagal immobilization and collapse. And where in more normal times, we may have been able to be more anchored in ventral. In these times, it's very common, because the challenges are so intense and ongoing, we don't get much of a break from them. You may find yourself moving into your familiar, habitual, old patterns of response, which may be sympathetic, mobilized fight and flight, anxiety, anger, fear, or that dorsal vagal, giving up, despair, hopelessness. So we want to just remember that these hierarchies, these predictable pathways, are built for us to serve our survival. And even though we get pulled out of ventral into sympathetic or dorsal, we want to bring some self-compassion. We are, I think the mantra nowadays is we're doing the best we can and we'll get through it. So we want to remember that. And then that third organizing principle, co-regulation, truly challenged nowadays, because co-regulation is a biological imperative, which means we do not survive without it, which means we need to co-regulate with another living, breathing mammalian nervous system. Many of us have pets, right? Even, Bob and I went to the animal shelter and adopted a cat last week, because another mammal around the house is a lovely thing. And now we're both home all the time. It felt like a really great time to adopt another family member. So many of you probably have dogs and cats who are bringing you some of that mammalian co-regulation, not a replacement for being with people. So if we can think about neuroception for just a moment, it's that detection without awareness, and it's listening inside, outside, in between. So think for a moment, it's listening inside your body to hear what's going on in your heart, in your breath, in your body rhythms, in your viscera, in your digestion, in your muscles. And if you just took a moment and just tuned in inside and listened, just see what your neuroception is hearing. Is it hearing cues of safety, or is it hearing cues of danger? And many of us are not sleeping well, are not eating well, are exhausted. And those cues inside the body of impaired digestion, of fatigue, of heart rhythms that are not regular, of breath rhythms that are out of sorts. Those are cues of danger to neuroception. And then if we travel outside for a moment, outside your body, if you just look around the place you're in right now, the environment, the room, is it bringing you a sense of ease or a sense of unease, dis-ease? Because we're all now trying to make our living spaces a bit more welcoming. Many of us have moved our offices home, and we're trying to figure out how do we create a space that looks inviting and is also comfortable to sit in front of a computer for hours in a day. So look around your environment, and then for a moment go outside your home or your apartment and just imagine into the world right around and what's happening there for cues of safety or danger. And then you might expand into your community, and then into your country, and then into society. And as we do this, we can feel the ways neuroception is being bombarded by cues of danger. And it's really hard to find those cues of safety. And then finally, between the nervous system listens between our nervous system and another person's nervous system. And right now, that's also challenged. You may be home, you may be sheltering at home with a family member who is a great resource for you, and you're a resource for them. So the between may be a cue of safety. You may also be sheltering at home with someone who you have a difficult relationship with. And that's, you can't get away. It's difficult to find distance. And so that's a cue of danger. Or you may be sheltering at home by yourself, in which case you don't have another nervous system to be in sharing space with. So these are all the ways that neuroception, that first organizing principle, is impacting how we're managing to navigate these really challenging times. And what we want to do with that is bring awareness to neuroception, because neuroception is operating below our thinking brain. So we have to bring perception or awareness to that process. And because neuroception often activates based on past experience, the question we want to ask to bring discernment to this process is, right now in this moment, in this place, with this person or with these people, is this nervous system state response needed? Because what happens for us now is that neuroception activates a cue of danger and we go to an intensely dysregulated response. And so to bring some awareness and to simply ask, not is it appropriate, because the nervous system is always acting in service of our survival. So appropriate's not the right word, but is it needed in this moment, in this place where I'm sitting with the people who are around me? That's one of the skills that we use in therapy, and it's one of the skills that is so important for us to use in our personal lives now. And so that hierarchy, just to review it briefly, at the top of the hierarchy, this ventral vagal system of safety and connection. It's where well-being takes place, health, growth, restoration. And that is where I believe our nervous system inherently longs to be and knows how to be. So it's not that we've forgotten or that we can't get back to this state of connection and safety and regulation. It's that we have so many cues of danger coming in through neuroception that it's really hard to anchor in this state of safety. And you may have found that, 6 weeks ago, before this really took off, you were doing much better. And what I would like to invite us to consider is that because things are unending, and unpredictable, unfamiliar, that these are ongoing cues of danger. These are neuroceptions of danger. And so it's much more difficult for us to hold on to those pathways to regulation. And we want to remember that those familiar pathways to sympathetic and dorsal exist in all of us. Our nervous system is built to take us, once we leave ventral, to sympathetic, to a mobilizing action to protect us. And some of you, for some of us, this is the familiar, I call it the home away from home, the place that we are used to going when our system is challenged. If that doesn't resolve the problem, and in this day and age, I'm not sure what resolving the problem is. We need to look at that, that way of thinking about things. And we have to probably define solving the problem in a new way. But for the moment, if sympathetic doesn't help us get out of the issue and back to ventral, then we go to dorsal. We go to that system of immobilization where protection is through disappearing, right? It's like going through the motions, but I'm not really here. I don't care. I'm despairing. I've lost hope. And I've heard from many colleagues recently who've gone to this place. And for many of us, that's been our home away from home. That's the familiar response. And so we're used to it, and it has a pull. So whichever your familiar survival response is, whether it has been sympathetic or dorsal, your system is more apt to pull you there now because the world feels dangerous. And this was the map that those of you who've done a training with me know. It's in my book, the directions are there. And when you come in November, we're going to be diving into this again. But just very quickly, this helps us understand that ventral, sympathetic, and dorsal carry very different stories. And it's important for us to remember that, because when we get pulled into sympathetic or dorsal, we think that that is the truth. We forget that there are 3 stories available to our nervous system at all times. So I'm going to ask you just for a moment to play around with me. And I'm going to ask us to start in sympathetic. And I'm going to ask you for a minute to just see if you can dip into that sympathetic state inside you of just a little bit of anxiety or frustration or anger or fear. Just enough so that you feel a little bit of it mobilizing. We don't want a lot of it right now. And when that comes alive and you feel that in your system, fill in those 2 sentences for yourself. When you feel that unease, that flavor of danger, how would you fill in the sentence? I am, and the world is. And now I'm going to invite us to go to dorsal for a moment and do the same thing. So think of that energy that makes you want to just give up, that despair. Everything feels so overwhelming that you lose any energy to move forward. And just sit with just a little bit of that. And when you feel that energy, or that lack of energy is a better way to put it, fill in those 2 sentences. From there, I am, and the world is. And then I'm going to invite us to come to ventral, because one of the rules, if there are rules, one of the rules around working with your nervous system is whatever you do, you always want to end by coming to ventral. So we're going to finish this exercise by coming to ventral. And think of a moment, or even a micro moment. It may be micro moments nowadays when you feel yourself in that state of feeling, okay, I'm okay. Not the world is wonderful, because it certainly isn't, but I'm okay. And I think I can navigate these next minutes or hours or even this day with some sense of grace and ease. And let that really fill you. Not just dip into it, but see if you can let it really fill you from your innermost place out into the world. And when you feel that energy of regulation, connection, and safety, fill in the same two sentences, I am, and the world is. And then what I'm going to invite you to do is to look at your 3 states and the 2 sentences from each state, and just notice how different the stories are about yourself and the world from each of those states. And we can begin to see that when people are in that sympathetic, mobilized survival state, everyone is an enemy, right? The story has to be one of me against the world. The world is unsafe. The world's chaotic. I can't manage. The sympathetic nervous system brings that kind of story, and we certainly see that and hear that on the news nowadays. It's been fascinating to watch the news and see how people respond, and how when their sympathetic nervous system activates, they start buying. In the US, I don't know what it's like in Europe, but in the US, it's been toilet paper. Everybody is buying toilet paper. Toilet paper has become a cue of safety for some reason. So, the sympathetic nervous system, you walk through a store and you think, oh, I have to have that because there are only 5 of them left on the shelf. And even though it's nothing I would ever want, my survival instinct says, grab that. That's your sympathetic nervous system trying to help you be safe. So, in dorsal, if you look at your sentences, the story from dorsal is one of being alone and abandoned. It's like if in sympathetic, it's me against the world. In dorsal, I'm untethered, I'm floating, and there really is no world or nobody else in it. And you can see that in people as well who are feeling the isolation and have no way out of that. And when there's no way out, the nervous system takes us to this dorsal disconnect, a flavor of dissociation disappearing. It's a very creative survival response, and it's a very difficult, distressing place for a being to inhabit. And then if you come to ventral and just look at your sentences there, and you see that the story of ventral is a story of options, of hope, of possibility. And it's only from ventral that your biology will allow you to have those stories of hope and possibility, of human connection, of kindness, of we're going to make it through this, right? Only ventral supports that story. So if you find yourself in a state of thinking, I can't do this anymore, I have to get out of here, I'm going stir crazy, let me out, or this is never going to be over and I'm not going to survive, bring a little self-compassion and remember that it's your biology that's bringing you those stories. The emergent properties of sympathetic and dorsal bring those stories. It's not that you want to be stuck in those places, but your biology has taken you there. And in ventral, when you make it to ventral, and even if it's only for a micro moment, savor being there. So we bring self-compassion to sympathetic or dorsal, but in ventral, we take a moment to savor. And for me, the gesture's the same. It's hand on the heart. When I'm in sympathetic, I can say, oh, Lord, here I am in sympathetic. When I'm in dorsal, I can say, oh, here I am again. In dorsal, my home away from home. And when I'm in ventral, I go, ah, there. I can savor this moment. So I'd encourage you to play around with a hand gesture that goes along, and it may be different ones for your 3 states, but adding a gesture is really a way to enhance self-compassion or enhance the savoring. And it's when we do those 2 things, bring self-compassion or move into savoring, that we begin to interrupt the old habitual survival responses that have so taken over our world nowadays. So again, this last organizing principle, co-regulation, is being deeply challenged at the moment. We are meant to be with other people. Our biology is wired that way. We're wired for connection. And what we're being asked to do now is to constrain what our biology needs and to find another way, a substitute for that for the moment. So we've got this longing to connect that pulls us to so want to be with another, but the drive to survive and the enforcement around self-isolation or shelter at home is really wreaking havoc on this particular part of our organizing principles of our nervous system. So again, there's not much we can do to change the structures that are in place right now, and we're going to have to find a way to be creative and work within them and help our nervous system have enough connection to feel nourished enough to bring us back to that ventral state of well-being. So I'm going to do this last slide, and then I'm going to come back to full screen so I can really see Liam's face and get a little of that co-regulation here. But what I've noticed recently is my inbox is inundated with suggestions. And there are suggestions from very wise teachers, and there's some suggestions from people I think are kind of on the crazy end of making suggestions, and the whole range in between. And what I've noticed, and what I have had colleagues talking to me about, is the inbox is filled with things saying, "Here's what to do. Do these 5 things every day, or breathe in this way, and you will find regulation, or move in this way, or eat in this way." And what I want us to remember when we're looking at the world through the lens of polyvagal theory and through the lens of the nervous system, that there's not a one-size-fits-all. So it's not that the suggestions are not right, it's that they're not right for everyone. And so what I'm going to invite you to do is to look at the suggestions and the recommendations that are coming to you from well-meaning friends, from wise teachers on the internet, from the newspaper, from the news, and ask your nervous system to weigh in. Don't ask your brain, because your brain is going to have a different response than your nervous system often. And if your brain and your nervous system don't agree, your nervous system's going to win that battle every time. So ask your nervous system. For instance, I was talking to my granddaughter recently. She's 8, and they were creating some structures in place. She has a 6-year-old sister and trying to figure out how to make this family run in some way that feels a bit organized. And so she FaceTimed me. It was 7 their time. And she FaceTimed me and said, "Good morning." I said, "Oh, good morning. And what are you doing?" She said, "Well, I'm in bed." And I said, "Oh, you're going to get up and have breakfast?" And she said, "No, breakfast isn't until 7:45. And I said, "Oh, you have a schedule. Uh-huh." And here is this little one at 7 thinking, "Oh, I have to wait 45 minutes for breakfast because that's what the schedule says." And I thought, okay, here Mom and I have to have a talk because, we need some flexibility within structure. And it was this moment when I thought, oh, that's what's happening for everybody. Everybody is taking suggestions, go outside and walk, or move once an hour, or whatever it is, breathe. Certain ways of breathing are going to bring you regulation, and are feeling very self-critical, even self-blaming, and even ashamed when they don't work for them. So what I'm going to invite you to do again is to take those suggestions and think, okay, if I breathe in this certain way that this very wise teacher is offering to me, how does my nervous system respond? Yes, no, or maybe. If it's a yes, I'm going to invite you to put it on a menu. I'm going to create a menu, put it on your menu. If it's a no, put it over to the side. If it's a maybe, it gets to go on the menu and you play with it. So it's yes, no, or maybe. And once you've gone through your list write your menu. And I'm encouraging you to really, get a big piece of paper, make it beautiful, have some fun with color, with markers, and write your menu. And your menu is changing. Like, this is the menu of the day. But tomorrow, when I get some more suggestions, there may be some I want to add to that menu. Or there may be some of the maybes that I want to cross off the menu, right? So you write your menu and then post it somewhere. Because what we also know is that when you move into sympathetic or dorsal, your prefrontal cortex does not come along for the ride. So you do not have access to your thinking brain. So you want to have this already done, pre-planned, pre-printed, put somewhere where you can easily get to it and look and say, oh, I'm going to try that, right? Because the only things on your menu are things that your nervous system is buying into. Okay, so I'm going to just stop the screen share so that I can come back and see Liam's face in big. Thank you. Yes, yeah. So there. So now we can have more of a general talk. I feel like I've got some basic anchors in place here to help people understand through the nervous system what's going on and what the incredible challenges of this moment in time are biologically for us through our nervous system's needs, and really to take some time to think about, how does my nervous system need to be nourished? Not necessarily the same way someone you're living with needs to be nourished, and that presents problems. How are we stuck together and coexist in ways that can be nourishing, and how might we be stuck alone and find ways to connect?
Absolutely. Because I remember from an earlier webinar that you did, Deb, and you said something that made so much sense to me. And you said, to have a healthy nervous system, we need a balance of self-regulation and co-regulation.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're missing the capacity, the opportunities to co-regulate, or they're different. I'm not saying we're missing them, they're different. Like, you and I have done some co-regulation before we got on the webinar, and it felt really nice, but it's different than being in person together. And the interesting thing is, when you've had enough experiences of co-regulation in your life, it creates the foundation for us to be able to self-regulate when circumstances demand that. It's just that we're not really built for circumstances to demand self-regulation for week after week after week after week. And, that seems to be what we're in right now. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting, because one of the things that I find very helpful to me personally at the moment is that when, as you know, I go to the States and I train in the use of touch. So I've done a lot of self-experience over there with a particular woman in, just working on my own trauma in the use of touch. And now for maybe about 30 or 40 minutes a day, what I do is I lie down and I'll, you could say, use my imagination, use my intention that the person is here with me, and they're actually touching my kidneys, my brainstem, my feet, and it's an amazing experience.
Yeah, and what you're talking about is beautiful, because, in many of the exercises I do, we're bringing back to life something that has already happened, and we're going to create a resource out of it. Because what I like to say is, it's an experience your nervous system has already had.
Absolutely.
And so it's wired into your nervous system. So it's not made up. It's not a fantasy. It's wired in here. And when we bring it back into awareness, it comes alive again. And you can actually feel, as you're feeling, that sense of connection.
Absolutely. Okay, Deb, so we'll move on a little bit. Is that okay?
That's perfectly fine.
So just before we move on, just to say thanks to everybody that sent in questions. I really appreciate it. And unfortunately, we won't get to all questions. But if we don't get to your question and it's burning, just please send me an email. My email address is Liam, that's Liam, at PCPSI.ie. And if I can't answer it, I'll send it to you, Deb, and you can answer it.
Sounds good. I would love to. Yes. Yeah.
That'd be great. So one of the things that really seems to be disrupting people is sleep.
Yeah.
So we've got
Yeah.
a lot of queries about sleep and sleep going. And so what
Yeah.
I've did, and I can relate to this myself, there seems to be two patterns of sleep that are really troublesome for people. The first pattern is that people are going to bed, going to sleep relatively quickly, and they sleep straight through for 9 or 10 hours. But when they wake in the morning, they don't feel rejuvenated. Actually, they feel the opposite, like they've been hit by a bus or hit by a train.
Yes.
So, and I've got a few specific questions around that. So one of the questions is, in the first sleeping pattern, the pattern I just described, mentioned, are people using high tone dorsal physiology shut down to sleep? If they are, how does this happen? And is there any suggestions to undo this pattern?
Oh boy. Yeah. You know, I'm going to say I don't know. And I think one of the things that's going to come out of this interesting time we're in is some more research, because now we have many people who are experiencing a similar environment and are having these responses.
Yeah.
But the waking feeling unrested, you know, certainly means that you didn't have the quality of sleep that would bring you a sense of rest, even though you slept all the way through. You didn't really. It's not a refreshing sleep, and in order for refreshing sleep, all three of your states have to be in relationship with each other in order to bring the right balance of sleep. And then the REM sleep and the non-REM and all that is dependent on becoming safely still. You know, we talked about stillness in the training we did, in stillness, true stillness that is refreshing and nourishing is when ventral and dorsal are active at the same time, because dorsal takes you into immobilization, but ventral brings safety to that experience. And so, you know, even sitting down nowadays to just be still or reflect or have a moment of mindfulness, or simply look out the window and take in whatever's out there. You know, for me, it's nice. I've got trees to take in the trees. To be able to do that and really let that in, I have to become still. And it's very difficult nowadays for people to become still without going into shutdown, because the sympathetic nervous system is trying to mobilize to keep us safe. And when sympathetic has to not do that so that we can begin to become quiet, there's this autonomic fear that instead of becoming still, we're going to shut down. You know, so when we think about sympathetic, its job is to both keep us mobilized and safe, but it's also to keep us out of shutdown. And, you know, so it's interesting to think about sleep and to think about what's the mismatch that's happening when you wake up and you know that you feel even more tired than when you went to sleep, even though you've slept for 10 hours. You really haven't. You've been you know, shut down for 10 hours is might be the way that I might think about it, but not slept, you know. And I'm not sure what there is to do about that. Now, you know, I talked about breath practices, which, you know, I will self-disclose, do not work for me very well. I'm not somebody with breath that helps, but that 4-7-8 breath practice has been shown to really help people get into a good sleep. So people might try that. You know, that's and you can Google that on it's on YouTube. Dr. Andrew Weil does a brief YouTube on the 4-7-8 breath. That's how you find it. I don't know. It's fascinating, Liam, to really deal with. And sleep is something that we're hearing more and more about now, because everybody's home and everybody's nervous system is disrupted.
Mm.
You know, it is dysregulated in so many ways. So sorry, I can't really answer that question any better, but it is a fascinating question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think you raise a really kind of interesting point, because and kind of an interesting question in that, say, at the moment there's a real threat there,
Yeah.
and there's COVID-19, and then
Yeah.
there's lots of us that have a history of threat, and probably a history of
Yeah.
threat still in our nervous
Yep.
system. So, like,
Absolutely.
you can imagine that these will get very coupled.
Mhm.
And is there a possibility, like, say, like if I do something like that, if I start doing kind of breathing practices, that I'll actually relax too much?
Um, I wouldn't put it as relax too much, but I would put it as it then becomes a cue of danger to your nervous system. So rather than it being a cue of safety, which would bring you to regulation, it becomes a cue of danger that again dysregulates you. So relaxation or becoming calm can definitely be a cue of danger for people.
Oh,
Absolutely. And if we think about that for a moment, people are hypervigilant nowadays, and they say that they have to be hypervigilant. Um, it's a common problem when we work with people in therapy, but now it's like common in the world. And what I want to invite us to consider is that when we're, we didn't talk about the vagal brake today, but we have before. The vagal brake is this pathway from your brainstem to your heart that regulates the rate of your heartbeat.
mm,
And its job is to relax so that your heart can beat faster when you need to, and
mhm,
then re-engage so that your heart rate slows down. And it does that in a beautiful way so that you don't go into a sympathetic survival fight and flight response. It simply gives you the energy to do what you need to do and then come back. So, what's happening nowadays is that the vagal brake is getting exercised all the time. I sent an email to a friend this morning, and I put a image of a person on a bicycle, because for me, I think about the brakes on a bicycle for my vagal brake, and I said, this is me all the time now. I cannot get off this bicycle because I'm being challenged all the time, right? And I think that's the feeling. And what I started off by saying before I get off on the tangent was the vagal brake can release to the edge so that you're feeling a lot of sympathetic energy in your system, but you're still in that safe zone
okay.
and you can be alert. And once the vagal brake goes away, you've now toppled into sympathetic survival and
Mm,
you're alarmed.
mm,
And there's a very big difference, even though it feels subtle when I talk about it. There is a huge biological and psychological difference between being alert and alarmed. And I think many, many people nowadays are in that alarmed state where their sympathetic nervous system is pumping out cortisol and adrenaline, rather than being in the alert state where my brain is my friend and is working with me, and I can be on guard and alert, but I feel safe when I'm doing that. And that's where we need to be helping people get, because if you can be in that place of alert, everything is going to get better, including your sleep.
okay. Okay. Brilliant. Brilliant, Deb. I'll just ask one more question, and you might have covered some of this, so we'll go through this quickly before we get to the Q&A.
Mhm.
So, again, everybody at the moment, you've mentioned it, stressed, anxious. And of course, we don't like that state. And, and people want to get to a state of ease and a state of
Mhm.
calm. And so
Mhm.
at the moment, Facebook is alive with
Yeah.
offerings of breathing practices, of
Mhm.
mindfulness. And
Mhm.
and some of
Mhm.
the people that have sent in questions, they've signed up for this and they've paid for this. But what people are finding is that while doing the breathing practices or doing the mindfulness is giving them a state shift,
Yeah.
number one, it's not lasting. The kind of
Right.
stress and anxiety is coming back. And
Right.
number two, at times then it's coming back with more intensity.
Yeah.
So people are feeling that these practices are not, in a way, kind of recalibrating their nervous system, are not
Mhm.
not
Yeah.
integrate the nervous system. So could you maybe comment on that, please?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. You know, we can't reshape our nervous system in a moment. It's not going to happen. It is a small and often practice that we have to do in order to reshape the system. And what's interesting is we can do a practice. We find a practice that works for us, whether it's a breath practice, a movement practice, a reflecting practice that then helps us feel anchored in ventral, helps us feel some ease and regulation and safety. And it works in that moment, right? But then when we come back into this sort of world we're living in, all the cues of danger just flood back in again, and your nervous system responds again to the cues of danger. Your nervous system's doing what it was created to do. It was created to respond to cues of danger. It's just that we're not used to having them there all the time in this way. And we're not used to having this moment of respite and then feeling the flood come back in. So that's part of what's happening. The other thing I think that we need to really work on is when you find a practice that works for you, you know, the word with the nervous system is small and often, right? Slower is faster, less is more. That's all the things that we know. So if there's a practice that works for you, do a small bit of it and then come back to it again and then come back to it again, so that you're showing your nervous system that you just keep coming back to this moment, this anchor that brings you some relief. Because what we want to do is stretch the system just a bit, and then we want to savor that stretch. Stretch, savor, keep doing that. As soon as we stress, we go into survival. So we want to make sure that whatever we're doing doesn't stress the nervous system, but just stretches it. So, you know, finding ways to have moments or even micro moments of ease is what I would be looking for. You know, for me, again, nature is pretty predictably a regulator for the nervous system. And so you might be able to look out your window, you might not. You might have to find something online that is a image of nature or a picture of nature. You know, they've got webcams all over the place now. Small, simple practices that you can keep returning to. And when you feel that intensity of either sympathetic or dorsal, of however your body takes in and responds to stress, which we would simply rework as response to cues of danger, right? When your nervous system is responding, take a moment and turn back towards whatever that thing was, that practice, and see if in the moment it can help just reduce it a bit. Because we're not going to resolve all these cues of danger at the moment. If we can reduce our response to them just a little bit, then we have a better chance at not dysregulating so often, right? And the other thing I want us to remember is that none of us are going to stay in ventral. There is no way we are going to stay in ventral throughout the course of this. We don't do it in daily living anyway. We're certainly not going to do it now. And the distress is not that we dysregulate into sympathetic or dorsal. It's when we get stuck there and can't find our way back home to ventral. So the practice is dysregulate, come home, dysregulate, come home, dysregulate, come home.
Yeah.
And I hope that will help people begin to, again, have a little more self-compassion. And if you find that when you get hit by those cues of danger the next time, your system dysregulates in an even bigger way, see again if you can create a larger menu of choices and see if you can begin to feel the beginnings of dysregulation, not after it's exploded into an intense response, but the very beginnings, and turn towards one of those things on your menu then.
Yeah.
Because even though it feels like, oh, it just exploded on me, that's really not true. We have to get really good at tracking the subtle beginnings of dysregulation.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because unfortunately, it seems to be a very human trait that we don't do something until these states are kind of screaming at us.
Exactly. Exactly. You know, and this, you know, I'm not that I'm, you know, enjoying what's going on in the world, but it's sort of heartwarming to me that these things that we're trying to do with our clients in therapy, we are all now being, you know, forced, required, invited to do for ourselves. This minute tracking of the nervous system, and when I'm just beginning to feel some dysregulation is the important moment to catch it and to know it and to turn towards it, right? And we're really good at helping our clients learn how to do that, and now we really have to be good at helping ourselves learn how to do that. Yeah.
Right. Can you see the other questions, Deb, or do you need me to call them
I
out?
can't. Can you do them?
Absolutely. So
Lovely.
this is from Sarah O'Byrne. So hello, Sarah. So thanks, Deb. Great to be on this webinar. I work with adolescents and looking for some ideas to support connection and regulation at this time, particularly for those that really do not see the need or the impact on their nervous system.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's true that our adolescents are some of them are very happy that they're now everything is e-learning and connection through a screen, right? Yeah, you know, it's interesting because in some ways, again, I think this is a moment when we can turn towards our devices and turn towards our remote ways of connecting, and make them more autonomically sensitive and attuning. I know that I now have a habit with my daughter and family outside of Chicago of FaceTiming with the family in the evening after they've had dinner. And, it's become sort of a moment when we all talk about what was the best part of our day, and, the things that you would do in person that you can't do. And it's become a meaningful moment for us. So I wonder if, Sarah, you can help your adolescents identify, again, perhaps you can help them map their nervous system, but identify for them what feels good to their nervous system. And by that, we want to mean what helps them come to ventral. And could we choose one or two of those things and really focus on those and resource those? Because I do think that online and remote, it can nourish the nervous system, especially now because it's a must. We don't have a lot of other choices. So I'd make sure that I helped each of your adolescent clients identify for them what is helping them come to ventral, and then let's create a way to be doing that more often.
Great. Thanks, Deb. So the next question from Anya Hutchinson. Thank you, Deb, for this crucial presentation. As a psychotherapist working with clients only online or by phone, I am acutely aware how this medium of being with the client is so different to face-to-face. I would welcome any comment about this transition within the context of the polyvagal theory.
Yeah, it is. For me, and what I'm finding when I talk to colleagues and present to people is that if you look at this time through the lens of the nervous system, it simplifies things, right? So if I'm going to do an online session, if Liam and I were going to meet for an online session, I'm going to do a lot of the same things I would do if you were in my office. I'm going to say, so, okay, where are we going to sit today, and how are we going to set this up? Right? Because there's a difference between me being like this and me being like this. And we're going to play around with your nervous system, or me being like this, right? It's the same as I would do in my office, but we're doing it through a screen and trying to figure out, what feels right to our nervous systems right now in this moment. And can I reach out? Can I do this? And can we mirror that? All the ways of using nervous system to nervous system connection, even though we're not in the same room. And the first time you do therapy with a client is very fascinating, because you're now inviting your clients into your home, most of us. And we're going into our clients' homes, which is a very interesting experience. And I've found that it's helpful to give my clients a tour of the space that I'm in, right? Because they only see this little thing, but I'm in a space, and to give them, take my camera and give them a tour of the space, and then to ask them, where are you? And what would you like to show me about where you are? And again, it's that invitation. Your tone of voice, if you're on the phone, tone of voice is incredibly important, because the nervous system is listening for prosody. It's listening for cues of connection in the way you're speaking. And then again, language becomes even more important, because we don't get all the other cues. So we want to use language that is always an invitation and not a request, because the nervous system responds to an invitation. What do you think about? Would you like to? I wonder if, shall we try? Rather than let's do this, right? It's a very different experience. So again, that's that, when we go back to context, choice, connection is really at work as we're working online. What's the context? I'm showing you around my space. I'm going to give you the same ways that I am going to hold the frame for us. I'm going to watch the time. I'm going to be present for you. The choice, how would you like to do this? Everything is framed as a choice. And then the connection. So it is a learning experience for we therapists. We were not trained. Most of us were not trained to be able to do this online. And yet I have found it's more exhausting, I think, for the therapist. I find I'm much more tired, because I'm working really hard to track my client's nervous system across time and space through a webcam and microphone. But I find that we're doing it.
Okay, thanks, Deb. So the next question, is there a link between polyvagal theory and bipolar disorder? It strikes me that mania has element of the SNS, and depression can feel like immobilization. Thanks.
Yes. And it's interesting, because when I had clients coming to me who would tell me they had a diagnosis of bipolar, I was always curious to see, is that truly an organic bipolar, or is that a nervous system's survival response to past trauma that hasn't been resolved and digested, so to speak? Because you're right, the switching between the mania, which feels very sympathetically driven, and the depression, which feels very dorsal driven, I think has in the past been confused for bipolar. So I would have clients that, if you get a psychiatrist, there are some really wonderful, brilliant psychiatrists who will work with you to sort of explore this and see what happens, if that psychotropic cocktail is not working, if lithium is not working, let's see if we could do some regulating of the nervous system and then see what happens to the symptoms, which really is, if you're working in a polyvagal way, what you do with everything, right? You regulate the nervous system, you help your client become an active operator of their nervous system, and then you look at all the symptoms and see what has resolved and what's left. And it gives you a clearer picture of the what's really organic and what has been a dysregulated nervous system response.
Okay, thanks, Deb. So the next question is from Anne Marie McDermott. Hi, Deb. What's your favorite thing on your menu?
My favorite thing on my menu. Well, okay, so nowadays my favorite thing on my menu is to snuggle my brand new cat. Gotta say, he is such a sweetheart, and he loves to be in my lap, and it just feels so regulating to me. My next favorite thing is to soak in some sunshine, and I'm looking out the window, we finally have some sun today. It's been a very dreary time. And it's interesting, because my go-to in a world that's not upside down the way we are now, my go-to is the ocean. And the ocean is, probably a 5-minute drive from my house. But I can't go there at the moment. The beaches are closed and the road is closed, so I can't go there. So it's interesting to think that what is the go-to on my menu usually is no longer available to me.
Okay, Deb, I think we're on the time, unfortunately.
Ah,
We have lots of other questions we could get through, but look, for another night. So listen, thanks to everybody, and especially thanks to you, Deb. As always, you're so knowledgeable and so humble in giving your kind of vast knowledge out to people. And just to remind people that certainly in the next few weeks, we're going to be doing more webinars, and hopefully we could even do another webinar with Deb, because there's just been so much questions left and people are so interested. And just to remind people that Deb is coming in November. Hopefully by November we'll be COVID-19 free.
oh, please, yes.
So it's a 4-day workshop, November the 26th to the 29th. And again, it's called Engaging the Rhythm of Regulation, the Foundations of Polyvagal Informed Practice, Part 1. And Part 2 will be in 2021.
Yeah, and can I just mention for people who are interested, I'm started a online book study group, which is beginning in May, which is going to just take each chapter of my book that you so lovely mentioned for me and sort of dive into talking about the concepts, and then some Q&A each week. So if anybody's interested in that, it's on my website.
And if you want to send in us on a link, Deb, we can send it out to anybody that's on the call tonight.
Thank you. That's lovely.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So listen, thanks to everybody. Please, if you didn't get your question in, send it to me. Again, my email address is liam, Liam, at pcpsi.ie. And if I can't answer the question, I'll ask Deb. And if Deb can't answer the question, we'll ask Stephen Porges.
We'll ask Steve, right, exactly. Beautiful.
So listen, all right. Deb, until we meet again, stay safe, stay well. And
you as well.
And to everybody on the call, stay safe and stay well. And we'll see you all soon. Take care, Deb. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.